The hardest part about losing someone isn't the goodbye. It's seeing them again when they're no longer supposed to exist. I was balancing a carry-on bag on one shoulder and holding my daughter's small hand with the other when the television above Gate 17 stole the air from my lungs. The airport buzzed around me with the usual chaos of delayed flights, rolling suitcases, and tired travelers searching for coffee. But all of it faded into a distant hum, because on the screen was a face I hadn't seen in 3 years. Adrian Moretti. The caption beneath his image called him one of New York's most influential businessmen. They always used words like influential, successful, powerful. They never talked about the loneliness hiding behind those cold green eyes. My pulse stumbled. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The reporter continued speaking while footage showed Adrian stepping out of a black SUV surrounded by cameras and security personnel. He looked older than I remembered. Not by much, just enough to tell a story. A few silver strands touched his dark hair near the temples. The sharp confidence was still there, but something else had settled into his face. Something heavier. Sadness had a way of leaving fingerprints on people. "Mommy." Lily tugged gently on my sleeve. Her voice pulled me back to reality. I looked down at my 7-year-old daughter. Her blonde hair was tied into a loose ponytail, and her blue-green eyes stared up at me with innocent curiosity. The same eyes that had haunted my dreams for years. The same eyes that belonged to someone else, too. "Are you okay?" she asked. I forced a smile. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm okay." It was a lie. The kind of lie that tasted bitter the moment it left my mouth. On the television, Adrian paused during an interview. Just for a second. His expression shifted. The camera zoomed in. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. I did. Because I knew him. I knew the way he looked when he was carrying something too painful to say aloud. My chest tightened. 3 years. 3 years of distance. 3 years of silence. 3 years of convincing myself I'd made the right decision. A million miles between us. And yet seeing him for 10 seconds on an airport television made those miles disappear like they had never existed. "Mommy, who is that?" Lily asked. My heart stopped. I glanced at the screen again. Adrian's face filled the monitor above us. Then I looked at my daughter. The resemblance was impossible to ignore when you knew what to look for. The eyes. The stubborn little tilt of her chin. The quiet strength she carried even at 7 years old. Panic crept through me. Cold and familiar. "Nobody," I said too quickly. "Just someone from New York." The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Passengers began lining up. Around us, life continued normally. But inside me, something had cracked open. A door I had spent years keeping locked. Then the reporter said something that made my blood run cold. "Tomorrow marks the 3rd anniversary of the tragic loss that changed Adrian Moretti's life forever." The camera cut to a photograph. My photograph. I froze. Lily looked up at the screen, then back at me. Confusion filled her face. "Mommy," she whispered softly. "That lady looks exactly like you." My photograph remained on the screen for only a few seconds, but it felt long enough to unravel 3 years of carefully constructed distance. I could not move. I could not think. Around me, families shuffled toward the boarding line. Children dragged backpacks across polished floors, and overhead announcements echoed through the terminal. Yet all I could hear was Lily's question repeating inside my head. "That lady looks exactly like you." I swallowed hard and forced myself to smile again. "It is just someone who looks a little like me," I said. Lily frowned. She had inherited many things from her father, including the ability to recognize when someone was not telling the whole truth. "She looks exactly like you," she insisted quietly. Before I could answer, the image disappeared and the broadcast returned to the reporter. Relief washed over me so suddenly that my knees felt weak. I guided Lily toward the boarding line and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. That was what I had been doing for 3 years. One step, then another, never looking back, never allowing myself to imagine what life would have been if I had stayed. The boarding agent scanned our tickets. Lily skipped ahead excitedly, completely unaware that my entire world had nearly collapsed in the middle of Terminal B. As we walked down the jet bridge, I glanced once over my shoulder. The television was no longer visible. Good. Some doors needed to stay closed. At least that was what I had told myself every day since I disappeared. We settled into our seats near the back of the plane. Lily immediately pressed her face against the window. "Do you think it will snow when we get there?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. I hope so. She smiled and returned to watching the ground crew below. I envied how simple happiness could be when you were 7 years old. No regrets. No secrets. No impossible choices. Just excitement about clouds and snowflakes. I reached into my purse and pulled out a worn photograph that I carried everywhere but rarely allowed myself to see. The edges were faded from years of handling. In the picture, Adrian stood beside me on a quiet autumn afternoon. Neither of us was looking at the camera. We were looking at each other. I traced the image with my thumb. Back then, I believed some people entered your life for a reason. I just never expected that reason to break your heart. The seatbelt sign illuminated overhead. Passengers settled into silence as the aircraft pushed away from the gate. I tucked the photograph back into my purse before Lily could notice it. Some truths were still too heavy for a child to carry. The engines began to roar. The plane slowly turned toward the runway. Then my phone vibrated. I froze. Almost nobody had this number. For a second, I considered ignoring it. But something deep inside me whispered that I should look. My hands trembled as I unlocked the screen. There was only one message. No name. No number. Just a single sentence. I know you are alive, Claire. The message remained on my screen long after the cabin lights dimmed. I read it once. Then twice. Then a third time, hoping the words would somehow change. They did not. I know you are alive, Claire. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. Across the aisle, a flight attendant demonstrated safety procedures. Around me, passengers settled into their seats, unaware that a single sentence had just shattered the fragile peace I had spent 3 years building. I locked my phone and slipped it into my purse. Not because I wanted to ignore the message, because I was afraid of what would happen if I kept staring at it. Lily rested her head against my shoulder. Within minutes, she had fallen asleep. Children had a gift for trusting the world. I used to have that gift too. Before secrets. Before impossible choices. Before Adrian. I looked out the window as the plane climbed through layers of gray clouds. The city below disappeared beneath a blanket of white. For a moment, everything outside became silent and endless. It reminded me of another night. 3 years earlier. The night everything began. My shift at Mercy General had ended almost an hour late. The emergency department was overflowing, and half the staff looked ready to collapse. I was 26 years old and surviving almost entirely on caffeine and determination. The coffee in my travel mug had gone cold hours earlier, but I drank it anyway as I crossed the employee parking lot. Rain fell in a steady drizzle, coating the pavement in silver reflections. My sneakers splashed through shallow puddles while exhaustion settled deep into my bones. All I wanted was my apartment, a hot shower, and 6 uninterrupted hours of sleep. Fate had other plans. Near the far end of the lot, I noticed someone sitting alone on a concrete bench beneath a flickering light. At first I assumed he was waiting for a ride. Then I saw the way he was leaning forward, one hand pressed against his chest, breathing slowly, as if concentrating on every breath. Something about him felt wrong. The nurse in me refused to keep walking. I changed direction and approached carefully. "Sir," I called out. "Are you okay?" He lifted his head. Green eyes met mine. For one strange second, the world seemed to pause. Even exhausted, I noticed how striking he was. Dark hair damp from the rain. Sharp features. An expensive black coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But it was not wealth that caught my attention. It was loneliness. The kind that hides behind a carefully controlled expression. "I am fine," he said quietly. The answer came too fast. Every nurse learns that people who insist they are fine usually are not. I folded my arms. That is not a very convincing answer. To my surprise, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not a smile exactly. More like he had forgotten how, and was trying to remember. "You always argue with strangers?" he asked. "Only the stubborn ones." The rain continued falling between us. Neither of us moved. Neither of us knew that this ordinary conversation in a hospital parking lot would change the course of both our lives forever. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and whatever warmth had appeared in his expression vanished instantly. His eyes remained fixed on the phone screen for several seconds. Whatever he saw there erased the brief spark of warmth that had appeared between us. The guarded expression returned. Controlled. Distant. Like a door quietly closing. I should have walked away. My shift was over. I was exhausted. And this stranger was clearly carrying problems far beyond anything I wanted to understand. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the loneliness I had seen in his face. Or maybe it was the simple fact that some people look like they have nobody checking whether they are okay. Bad news. I asked before I could stop myself. He looked up. For a moment, I thought he might ignore the question. Instead, he slipped the phone into his coat pocket. Something like that. The answer was careful, measured, the kind of answer people give when they have spent years hiding their real thoughts. I nodded toward the hospital entrance. You know, most people come here because they need help. Sitting outside in the rain kind of defeats the purpose. That almost smile appeared again, slightly stronger this time. Are you always this persistent? It is one of my less charming qualities. To my surprise, he laughed softly. The sound seemed unfamiliar to him, as if he did not use it often. Rain tapped against the metal bench above us. Cars moved through the parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, an ambulance siren echoed through the night. Ordinary sounds, ordinary moments. Yet something about that conversation felt different. Easy, natural, like speaking to someone I had known longer than 5 minutes. What is your name? I asked. He hesitated, just enough for me to notice. Adrian. Claire. We shook hands. His grip was firm but respectful. The moment lasted only a second before we both stepped back. Well, Adrian, I said, adjusting my bag on my shoulder. My professional opinion is that you should go home, get some sleep, and stop sitting in hospital parking lots during rainstorms. Professional opinion? I am a nurse. We like giving advice, even when nobody asks for it. Especially then. Another faint laugh. Then silence settled between us again. Comfortable silence. The rare kind that does not need filling. I noticed a black SUV pull into the lot several rows away. It stopped without approaching. The headlights remained on. Something about it felt strange. Adrian noticed it too. His attention shifted immediately. His posture changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to sense that the man sitting beside me had suddenly become alert. Focused. Different. A moment later, his phone vibrated again. He glanced at the screen and sighed. This time the exhaustion in his face looked older than one bad day. Older than one difficult week. I should go, he said quietly. I nodded. Then go. He stood. Rain collected on the shoulders of his dark coat. For a second, neither of us moved. It felt strangely disappointing, like a conversation ending before it was finished. Thank you, Claire. For what? His expression softened. For treating me like a normal person. Before I could respond, he turned and walked toward the waiting SUV. I watched him disappear into the rain. Watched the vehicle pull away from the hospital and vanish into the darkness beyond the parking lot. I told myself I would never see him again. I was wrong. Less than 24 hours later, Adrian Moretti would walk back into my life, carrying a problem only I could solve. The next afternoon began like every other shift. Bright fluorescent lights. Endless paperwork. The smell of coffee that had been sitting too long on a hot plate. I had almost convinced myself that Adrian Moretti was nothing more than a strange encounter in a rainy parking lot. Then the charge nurse called my name. Claire, someone is asking for you. I glanced up from the chart in my hands. Who? She shrugged. Did not say, but judging by the way half the lobby is staring at him, you will probably recognize him. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked toward the main entrance and immediately stopped. Adrian stood near the reception desk wearing a charcoal suit that looked perfectly tailored. People pretended not to stare while very obviously staring. Even standing still, he drew attention. Not because he was loud, because he was the opposite. Controlled, quiet, certain. When his eyes found mine, something shifted in his expression. Relief. The realization startled me. You came back? I said. One corner of his mouth lifted. You sound surprised. Most strangers do not return to hospitals looking for nurses they met in parking lots. Perhaps I am not most strangers. Fair point. I folded my arms. What do you need? His gaze drifted briefly toward the elevators before returning to me. For the first time, I noticed genuine concern beneath his calm exterior. Someone important to me needs help. The answer immediately changed everything. There was no arrogance in his voice. No demand. Just worry. Pure and simple. What kind of help? I asked. My nephew. We rode the elevator in silence. Adrian stood beside me with his hands in his pockets while numbers slowly climbed above the doors. The tension around him seemed heavier than the day before. Like he had not slept. Like he had been carrying too much for too long. How old is he? I asked. 8. What happened? Adrian looked down briefly. His mother passed away last year. My chest tightened. I am sorry. He nodded once. Since then he barely speaks. The specialists say grief affects everyone differently. They tell me to be patient. And are you patient? Another faint smile. Not particularly. The elevator doors opened onto the pediatric floor. Colorful murals covered the walls. Cartoon animals smiled from every corner. It was impossible not to notice how out of place Adrian looked standing there in his expensive suit among painted giraffes and rainbows. We walked toward a private room at the end of the hallway. Through the glass, I saw a young boy sitting by the window with a sketchbook resting on his lap. He stared outside without turning a page. Without moving at all, Adrian stopped beside the door. For a second, his carefully constructed composure cracked. Just enough for me to see how much he cared. His name is Ethan, he said quietly. He used to laugh all the time. I looked through the glass again. The boy remained motionless, alone despite not being alone. The sight broke something inside me. Then Adrian said the words that changed everything. You are the first person I have trusted enough to bring here, Claire. Ethan did not look at me when I entered the room. He remained by the window, small shoulders rigid beneath an oversized gray sweatshirt, his sketchbook balanced on his knees. The afternoon sunlight painted pale stripes across the floor, but he seemed miles away from all of it. I approached slowly and pulled a chair beside him. Hi, Ethan. No response, not even a glance. Behind me, I felt Adrian watching from the hallway through the glass panel. His concern filled the room, even from a distance. I understood it now. This was not simply a child struggling with grief. This was someone who had locked himself behind walls nobody knew how to reach. I sat quietly for several minutes. Nurses learn that silence can be just as important as questions. Eventually, I noticed the sketchbook. Every page contained the same drawing. A lighthouse standing alone beside the ocean. Again and again. The same image. The same lonely tower. I like lighthouses too, I said softly. Ethan's fingers tightened around his pencil. It was the first reaction I had seen. Tiny. Almost invisible. But it was there. My dad used to take me to one when I was little. I smiled at the memory. The stairs felt like they went up forever. Ethan lowered his eyes to the page. Another small reaction. Another crack in the wall. I continued talking. Not because I expected answers. Because sometimes people need to know someone is willing to stay. I told him about ridiculous hospital stories. About patients who smuggled cheeseburgers into restricted diets. About a nurse who accidentally locked herself in a supply closet. Nothing important. Just ordinary life. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Finally, I stood to leave. I will come back tomorrow, I said. You do not have to talk. But I will bring better stories. As I reached the door, I heard something. So quiet I almost thought I imagined it. The lighthouse is waiting. I froze. Slowly, I turned around. Ethan stared at the sketchbook. His voice had barely risen above a whisper. My heart nearly stopped. What did you say? He swallowed hard. The lighthouse. His finger touched the drawing. It is waiting for someone. Emotion caught in my throat. Not because of the words. Because they were words at all. Real words. The first Adrian had heard from him in months. Before I could answer, Ethan quickly looked away, embarrassed by his own bravery. I smiled. Maybe it is. When I stepped into the hallway, Adrian was standing there motionless. His eyes never left the room. You heard him? I asked. Adrian nodded once. He looked completely stunned, like someone had handed him a miracle he no longer believed existed. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled slowly and rubbed a hand across his face. The gesture revealed exhaustion deeper than I had ever seen. Thank you, he said quietly. Do not thank me yet. I am going to anyway. We walked toward the elevator together. The hospital buzzed around us with its usual noise, but something felt different now. Lighter. Hopeful. As the elevator doors opened, Adrian looked at me with an expression I could not quite understand. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. Claire, there is something important I have not told you about myself. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving only the two of us inside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The soft hum of the machinery filled the silence while the numbers above the door slowly descended. Adrian stared straight ahead with his hands in his coat pockets. Whatever he wanted to tell me was not easy for him. I could see that much. You are making me nervous, I said lightly. A faint smile appeared and disappeared just as quickly. That was not my intention. Then what is? He exhaled slowly. Honesty. The word surprised me. Most people used honesty as an excuse after they had already hidden something important. I turned toward him. Okay. Adrian nodded once. The version of me that most people know is not the real version. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds dramatic. It is. The elevator reached the lobby, but neither of us moved when the doors opened. People passed by outside while we remained standing inside the empty elevator car. Adrian pressed the button to close the doors again. My family owns several companies, he said. Real estate, logistics, investments. That explains the expensive suits. Another small smile. Partly. Something about his tone made me pay closer attention. He was choosing every word carefully, like someone walking across thin ice. And the other part? I asked. Adrian looked directly at me. Those green eyes held a seriousness I had never seen before. The other part is that my family has spent generations surrounded by power. The kind of power that attracts attention. Loyalty. Enemies. The last word lingered between us. My stomach tightened slightly. Enemies. He nodded. People who would use those close to me if it benefited them. Suddenly, I understood why Ethan lived in a private hospital suite. Why the black SUV had waited outside in the rain. Why Adrian always seemed aware of everything around him. You are not just some businessman, are you? I asked quietly. Adrian looked away. The silence answered before he did. No. The elevator descended another floor. Then another. Finally, he spoke again. I am telling you this because you deserve to know before you spend more time helping Ethan. I studied his face. There was no arrogance there. No attempt to impress me. If anything, he seemed worried about how I would react. And what exactly are you expecting me to do? I asked. Walk away. His answer came immediately. If that is what you decide. The honesty caught me off guard. Most powerful people expected compliance. Adrian was offering a choice. A real one. I thought about Ethan sitting alone by the window. About the lighthouse drawings. About the way his voice had trembled when he finally spoke. Then I looked back at Adrian. You know, I said softly. I became a nurse because people need help. Not because their lives are simple. Something shifted in his expression. Relief. Gratitude. Maybe both. The elevator finally stopped at the parking garage. The doors opened. Cool evening air drifted inside. Adrian stepped out first, then paused beside a black SUV waiting nearby. Claire, he said. Yes. For a moment, he looked almost uncertain. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? My heart skipped unexpectedly. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and all the color drained from his face. The change happened so quickly it startled me. 1 second Adrian was standing beside me in the parking garage, asking me to dinner. The next, he was staring at his phone as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. What is it? I asked. He did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the screen. Then he locked the phone and slipped it into his pocket. The movement looked calm. Too calm. Like someone forcing control over a storm. Adrian. He looked at me and managed a small smile that did not reach his eyes. I need to take care of something. The answer was simple, but something underneath it felt wrong. I could feel it. Nurses spend years reading faces. Fear, grief, relief, exhaustion. People reveal more than they realize. And right now Adrian looked worried. Not for himself. For someone else. Is Ethan okay? I asked. His expression softened slightly. Yes, Ethan is fine. I nodded, relieved. Then whatever it is can wait until after dinner tomorrow. For a second, he simply stared at me. Then a quiet laugh escaped him. You are surprisingly stubborn. I have heard that before. Frequently. Almost daily. This time his smile became real. Brief, but real. The tension around him eased just enough for me to breathe again. A driver stepped out of the SUV and waited respectfully nearby. Adrian glanced toward the vehicle before looking back at me. Tomorrow at 7? He asked. My heart performed an annoying little flip. You are assuming I said yes. You did. I narrowed my eyes. Confident. Observant. I hated that he was probably right. Fine. 7. The smile that followed transformed his entire face. For a moment he looked younger. Less burdened. Less alone. Then he opened the rear door of the SUV. Before getting inside, he paused. Claire. Yes. Thank you. I laughed softly. For agreeing to dinner? He shook his head. For Ethan. The vehicle disappeared into the evening traffic a few moments later, leaving me standing alone beneath the garage lights. The strange thing was that I did not feel alone. I felt lighter. Happier. Which was ridiculous considering I barely knew him. The next day passed painfully slowly. Every patient seemed to arrive at once. Every clock in the hospital appeared frozen. By 6:30, I had changed clothes 3 times and regretted every outfit. It was embarrassing. I was 26 years old, not 16. Yet, somehow, Adrian Moretti had reduced me to checking my reflection every 10 minutes. At exactly 6:55, my phone buzzed. A message appeared. Looking forward to tonight. I smiled despite myself. Then another message arrived. This one from an unknown number. The smile vanished instantly. Do not go. My stomach tightened. I stared at the screen. A second message appeared before I could react. You do not know who Adrian Moretti really is. My pulse quickened. For several seconds, I simply stood there. Then the final message arrived. And this one made my blood run cold. Ask him what happened to the woman he loved before you. I stared at the final message until the words blurred together. Ask him what happened to the woman he loved before you. The restaurant reservation suddenly felt unimportant. The excitement I had carried all day dissolved into uncertainty. I read the messages again, searching for clues. There was nothing. No name. No explanation. Just warnings. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was someone with a grudge. Maybe it was none of my business. Yet the knot in my stomach refused to disappear. At 6:58, another message arrived. This one from Adrian. I am outside. I looked through the hospital entrance and immediately spotted him standing beside the familiar black SUV. He was not checking his phone. He was not watching the traffic. He was looking directly at the doors as if he had been waiting there for much longer than 2 minutes. Something about that simple detail softened my anxiety. I slipped my phone into my purse and walked outside. The evening air was cool against my skin. When Adrian saw me, a genuine smile appeared, the kind that reached his eyes. You look beautiful tonight, Claire. Heat rushed into my cheeks. You clean up pretty well yourself. His smile widened. For a moment, I almost forgot the messages. Almost. During the drive, conversation came easily. We talked about Ethan, about hospital stories, about terrible coffee, about everything except the questions circling my mind. The restaurant sat along the Hudson River with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. Soft lights reflected across the surface like scattered stars. It should have felt romantic. Instead, I felt distracted. Adrian noticed immediately. He always noticed. Halfway through dinner, he set down his glass and studied me carefully. Something is wrong. I looked away. Nothing is wrong. That is not true. The certainty in his voice made lying impossible. I sighed. Can I ask you something? Anything. I hesitated. The restaurant noise faded into the background. My pulse quickened. Was there someone before me? Adrian went completely still. Not angry. Not defensive. Just still. The reaction told me more than words could have. Several seconds passed before he answered. Yes. My heart sank unexpectedly. I did not understand why. We were not even together. Yet hearing the answer hurt anyway. Adrian looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. Her name was Sophia. The name hung between us. What happened? I asked quietly. For the first time since I met him, sadness overwhelmed every other emotion on his face. Deep sadness. Old sadness. The kind that never fully leaves. I lost her. His voice was barely above a whisper. 3 years ago. 3 years. The same number that echoed through my own secret life. I felt my breath catch. Adrian continued staring at the table. She changed me. She made me believe I could become someone better than the man I had been. The pain in his eyes was impossible to fake. This was real. Every word. Every memory. Then he reached into his wallet and removed a photograph. Slowly, he placed it on the table between us. My entire world stopped. Because the woman smiling beside Adrian in that picture was me. Every sound in the restaurant disappeared. The conversations. The music. The clinking glasses. All of it faded into silence as I stared at the photograph lying between us. My hands turned cold. My heartbeat became a dull roar inside my ears. The woman in the picture had my face. My smile. My eyes. It was not someone who looked like me. It was me. Or at least the version of me that existed before everything changed. Adrian mistook my shock for something else. I know what you are thinking, he said quietly. The resemblance surprised me too when we first met. I could barely breathe. He thought we were strangers. He thought fate had placed another woman in front of him who happened to resemble the person he had lost. The truth was so much bigger. So much more painful. I forced myself to look away from the photograph before my expression betrayed me. She really looks like me, I managed. Adrian nodded slowly. His gaze never left the image. Sometimes it still catches me off guard. The sadness in his voice felt like a knife twisting inside my chest. For 3 years I had imagined many versions of this moment. Anger, resentment, relief. I had prepared myself for all of them. What I had not prepared for was seeing how deeply he still loved the woman he believed was gone. What was she like? I asked. The question came out softer than I intended. Adrian smiled. Not the careful smile he showed the world. This one was different. Warm, genuine, full of memories. She was stubborn. I laughed despite myself. That does not sound very flattering. It is when you spend your life surrounded by people who only tell you what you want to hear. He leaned back slightly. She challenged me, questioned me, refused to be impressed by money or influence. His eyes drifted toward the river beyond the windows. She made ordinary things feel important. I swallowed hard. Every word felt like a memory reaching across time. Did you love her? The answer arrived instantly. More than anything. My chest tightened. I looked down at my hands, terrified he would see the tears gathering in my eyes. Adrian continued speaking quietly. I spent years building walls around myself. She walked through them without even realizing it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he reached into his wallet again. This time he removed a folded piece of paper. The edges were worn from being opened too many times. This was the last note she ever gave me. He carefully unfolded it and placed it beside the photograph. My pulse stopped. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was mine. Every curve, every letter, every word. The note was dated 3 years ago, the day before I disappeared. Adrian looked at me with a sad smile. I still carry it everywhere. Then his phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen and frowned. A photograph had just been sent from an unknown number. Adrian opened it. The color drained from his face. Slowly, he turned the screen toward me. The image showed a young blonde girl leaving an airport terminal, and I knew her instantly. It was Lily. The photograph felt heavier than the phone itself. Adrian stared at the image of Lily for several seconds without speaking. I could see his mind racing, searching for answers that did not exist, or answers he was not ready to see. My pulse pounded so loudly I thought he might hear it across the table. The picture had clearly been taken recently. Lily was wearing the same blue sweater she had worn at the airport. The same backpack hung from her shoulder. Whoever sent the photograph knew exactly who she was. And somehow they knew Adrian would recognize her importance. "Do you know that child?" Adrian asked quietly. The question struck me like lightning. I forced myself to breathe. No, I lied. The word tasted awful. Adrian continued staring at the screen. "That is strange." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because she looks familiar." My heart nearly stopped. He zoomed in on the image. The restaurant lights reflected across the screen while his eyes studied every detail. The blonde hair, the green-blue eyes, the stubborn expression, features he had seen before without realizing where. "Maybe she reminds you of someone," I suggested. Adrian slowly lowered the phone. "Maybe," but I could tell he was not convinced. Another message appeared beneath the photograph. This one contained only a location and a timestamp from 2 days earlier. Seattle. I felt the blood drain from my face. Adrian noticed immediately. "Claire, I am fine. You are pale." I looked away toward the river. Outside, boats drifted across the dark water beneath strings of city lights. Everything appeared calm. Yet inside me, panic spread with every passing second. Whoever had sent those messages knew about Lily, knew where she had been, maybe even where she was now. Adrian leaned forward. "Tell me what is going on." The concern in his voice almost broke me. For 3 years I had carried every secret alone. Every fear, every sacrifice, every impossible decision. And now the man I had been trying to protect sat across from me, asking questions I could not answer. "Not yet. There is nothing going on," I whispered. Adrian studied me carefully. He knew I was lying. We both knew it. But for reasons I could not understand, he chose not to push. Instead, he folded the photograph of Sophia and slipped it back into his wallet. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes people disappear because they are running from something." I froze. His eyes remained fixed on the table. "And sometimes they disappear because they are trying to protect someone." Emotion tightened my throat. Adrian gave a sad smile. I spent 3 years wondering which one applied to her. The words shattered something inside me. Because for the first time, he was closer to the truth than he realized. My phone vibrated beneath the table. Slowly, I looked down. Another unknown message. My hands trembled as I opened it. There was no photograph this time. No warning. Just a single sentence. Tell Adrian the truth before someone else does. My hands would not stop shaking. The message glowed on the screen beneath the table like a countdown I could no longer ignore. Tell Adrian the truth before someone else does. 3 years of silence. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of convincing myself that distance was the same thing as protection. And now every secret I had buried was finding its way back to the surface. I locked the phone and looked up. Adrian was watching me. Not suspicious. Not angry. Concerned. That somehow made everything harder. Claire, he said softly, whatever is happening, you do not have to face it alone. The words hit me harder than any accusation could have, because he had no idea how much of this was connected to him, to us, to a life he believed had ended years ago. I looked at the river outside the window. The dark water moved steadily beneath the city lights. Forward. Always forward. I wished life worked that way. Instead, the past had a habit of waiting. Patient. Unfinished. Do you ever get tired? I asked suddenly. Adrian frowned. Tired of what? Missing someone. His expression changed immediately. The sadness returned. Familiar now. Permanent. Every day. His answer came without hesitation. Some mornings are easier than others. Most are not. I swallowed hard. And if she came back? For a moment, he simply stared at me. The question seemed to catch him completely off guard. That is impossible. But if it was not? Adrian leaned back in his chair. His eyes searched mine as though trying to understand why I was asking. For a long time, I imagined that moment. His voice was quiet. I imagined what I would say, what I would do. And he smiled sadly. Then I realized none of it mattered. My heart pounded. Why? Because if she was alive, it would mean she survived. He looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. That would be enough. Tears burned behind my eyes. 3 years. 3 years of believing he would hate me for leaving. 3 years of believing he would never understand. And yet the only thing that mattered to him was that I had lived. My phone vibrated again. Another message. This time there was no text. Only a photograph. I opened it and felt the world tilt. It showed me standing outside a small grocery store in Seattle 6 months earlier. Lily stood beside me holding my hand. Someone had been watching us. For months. Maybe longer. Adrian saw the color leave my face. What is it? He asked. I could not answer. Not anymore. The lies were collapsing too quickly. The fear that had driven every decision suddenly felt smaller than the damage those decisions had caused. Slowly, I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man who still carried my note. The man who still visited my grave. The man who had spent 3 years loving someone he believed was gone. My chest tightened. Adrian, I whispered. His eyes locked onto mine. There is something I need to tell you. At that exact moment, a voice spoke from behind us. I was wondering how long it would take. Every muscle in my body froze. Because I recognized that voice immediately, my entire body went rigid. Slowly, I turned toward the voice. A woman stood a few feet away from our table. Mid-50s. Blonde hair pulled neatly behind her shoulders. Calm blue eyes. The moment I saw her face, memories crashed over me. Margaret Hayes. The only person who knew everything. The only person who had helped me disappear 3 years ago. Adrian rose from his chair immediately. Confusion flashed across his face as he looked between us. You know each other? He asked. Margaret gave me a sad smile. More than you realize. My heart sank. This was not how I wanted it to happen. Not here. Not like this. But some truths refused to stay buried forever. Margaret stepped closer and placed a small envelope on the table. I told her this day would come, she said softly. Adrian looked at me, then at the envelope, then back at me. The silence became unbearable. My hands trembled as I reached for the envelope. I already knew what was inside. The birth certificate. The one document I had hidden from the world for 7 years. Slowly, I opened it and slid the paper across the table. Adrian lowered his eyes. At first, he did not understand what he was seeing. Then I watched the exact moment it happened. The moment everything changed. His gaze stopped on a single line. Father's name. Adrian Moretti. The color drained from his face. He looked up at me, then back at the document, then at me again. Lily, he whispered. I nodded. Tears blurred my vision. She is your daughter. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire restaurant disappeared around us. There was only the truth. Raw and unavoidable. Adrian stared at the paper as if it belonged to someone else, as if reality had shifted beneath his feet. Finally, he looked at me. You were alive. The pain in his voice nearly broke me. Yes. All this time. I nodded again. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I am sorry. Adrian closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were shining with emotion. You let me believe you were gone. I thought I was protecting you. The words came out as a whisper. There were people watching us. People paying attention to everything connected to you. When I learned I was pregnant, I became terrified that Lily would grow up carrying that burden. My voice shook. I thought if I disappeared, she could have a normal life. And you could be safe too. Adrian stared at me for a long time. Then something unexpected happened. He reached across the table and took my hand. Not with anger. Not with resentment. Just relief. Pure relief. Claire, he said softly. Do you have any idea how many times I stood at your grave wishing for one more chance? Tears rolled freely down my face now. Adrian laughed through his own emotion and shook his head. You spent 7 years protecting us. His grip tightened gently around my hand. Now let me spend the rest of my life protecting you. For the first time in 3 years, the distance between us disappeared. Not because the past stopped hurting. Not because every mistake was erased. But because home was never a place. It was never a city. It was never a house. Home was the person who still reached for your hand after learning every difficult truth. And after everything we had lost, everything we had survived, Adrian was still reaching for mine.